Okay, we're going to start out tonight where we left off last time, and we had not quite finished the text where Job was responding at the end of the first round. And we're going to try tonight to finish that text and then cover all three of the friends' conversation in the next round, in round two, before we actually get started then on Job's response to all three. So that's kind of the way that we'll cover it tonight. But at the end of our class last time, we had looked at Job had talked, he had justified and said, you know, I understand, I know these things as well. You know, the things that you've told me, it's nothing that I don't already know, but that is not the situation. And of course, we know that Job begins to be more and more frustrated, as do his friends, and we'll see that tonight. This last part of chapter 14, verses 7 through 15, say Job is answering again back to Zophar, and he says, "For there is hope for a tree, if it is cut down, that it will sprout up again, and that its tender shoots will not cease. Though its root may grow old in the earth, and its stump may die in the ground, yet at the scent of water it will bud and bring forth branches like a plant. But man dies and is laid away. Indeed, he breathes his last. And where is he? As water disappears from the sea and a river becomes parched and dries up, so man lies down and does not rise. Till the heavens are no more, they will not awake, nor be roused from their sleep. Oh, that I would hide in the grave, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he not live again? All the days of my hard service I will wait, till my change comes. You shall call, and I will answer. You shall desire the work of your hands." And so it is interesting. There's a couple things that are really interesting about the text. One, obviously, which right off the bat strikes us, is this hope of a resurrection that Job already seems to be aware of. And that's something that we don't always give those in the Old Testament the credit for. And we don't always remember or think about all that they might have known. So Job has given us now some thoughts on life that are not so great. He talks about, we talked about that last week, but there's a lot of truth in his words, and we've looked at that. And now he turns again to death, which he always does. In the end, when afflictions come on us to any extent, it brings us and our minds to heaven. When we lose those that we love, we think of where they are and we yearn more for heaven. And so I'm not going to talk at length about this ending part of Job's conversation, only because we talked about it in chapter. We see reflections of it in chapter 6 and 7 and 10. In summary, he says that, you know, even if a tree is cut down, if the conditions are right, it's going to shoot forth again. And we've seen this in our own gardens. You ever pulled a weed and you've pulled it and you've pulled it and you think you've gotten the entire root, but if there's just a little bit of water and a little bit of nourishment, it will come back, as will our annual plants and our perennial plants sometimes even do that. Our annuals even do that. And so he says, if the conditions are right, another substantial tree can grow. But when man's cut off by death, he's forever removed. And he no longer lives on the earth in the place that he was planted. He cannot and will not return, no matter what the conditions are that are present in the world that he left. The life of a man is reasonably compared by Job with the waters of a land flood that spread a long way. They're far and they swell and they're alive and they're rushing and they're active and they're impressive, but soon they're dried up and they're gone. And so he talks about that. We lie down at night and we rise up in the morning to start a new day on earth. But when we're buried at death, we don't wake up to the world again. And so he's just talking about things that we understand about death. He seems in this passage to express belief in the great doctrine of resurrection. Job's friends have proved to be terrible comforters at this point, but he seems to speak of an eternal hope. That even if his friends cannot comfort him, and even if there's no comfort in life, and even if his wife has really denied the truth that he knows, he still has hope in the eternal, and that sins can be forgiven, and that our hearts can be renewed in righteousness. Heaven will be a rest to our souls while our bodies are hidden in the grave from our enemies, feeling no more the pain from our fleshly corruption or instruction or admonition. We will not rise again until the heavens, after a measure of time, shall be no more, and then man will return to life. Chapter 19, he states, and after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that my flesh shall see God. So later in the second round, he expresses that. It's a very interesting revelation for us of what Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses understood about the hope, eternal hope. And so he's asked for a hiding place in the grave. He's weary. He's tired. He has nobody to turn to. He will not be unseen by God, only man. To God, it is a resting place. And boy, oh boy, could Job use a resting place right now, right? And he could be hidden from these conversations. He wouldn't have to listen. Life is hard. Life was hard. Life is hard. It is hard. And harder as afflictions come. Let me lie down and wait for the glorious day that I will see you, till my change comes and I am with you, he expresses. What a beautiful thought for one who is in such a state. No more temptation, no more pain, no more sickness, no more decay. And then what glory I will see. You will require of me then, and I will answer you. You will no longer be hidden from me. There are better days, Job is sure of, after the departure of this place. And it is interesting, the language here, then the change comes. Death is serious. Death is actually described as a work itself. How we die well in the Lord, actively moving from one known state to another unknown state completely. We will die to live, and somehow Job understood that there would be that transformation, that there would be that change, that there would be a work, an activity on both the part of himself and God. You've ever watched someone die? You experience this thought process of what happens with that change. And the holy resurrection, all the days of my hard service, he says, I will wait, and then I will be changed, and you will call. And in the new body, no sores, no pain, I will hear you call. But until then, I wait in faith, in obedience, in trouble, in trial, I will wait. And so he talks of this wait. And that is, if you've ever taken care of somebody at the very end, you know that that really is a wait. It's an activity, it's a work, that they're patiently waiting for their hope, that eternal hope. He goes on in verses 16 through 22 to finish his discourse after this last round. And he says, and now you number my steps, but do not watch over my sin. My transgression is sealed up in a bag, and you cover my iniquity. But as a mountain fails and crumbles away, and as a rock is moved from its place, as water wears away stones, and as torrents wash away the soul of the earth, so you destroy the hope of man. You prevail forever against him, and he passes on. You change his countenance and send him away. His sons come to honor, and he does not know it. They are brought low, and he does not perceive it. But his flesh will be in pain over it, and his soul will mourn over it. And so just let me go, he says, because I'm having a terribly hard time getting over my present situation. Matthew Henry says, Job's faith and hope spake, and grace appeared to revive, but depravity again prevailed. He represents God as carrying matters to extremity against him. The Lord must prevail against all who contend with him. God may send disease and pain. We may lose all comfort in those near and dear to us, every hope of earthly happiness may be destroyed, but God will receive the believer into the realms of eternal happiness. But what a change awaits the prosperous unbeliever. How will he answer when God shall call him to his tribunal? The Lord is yet upon a mercy seat, ready to be gracious. Oh, that sinners should be wise, that they should consider their latter end, while man's flesh is upon him, that is the body. He is so loath to lay down, it shall have pain. And while his soul is within him, that is the spirit, he is loath to resign, it shall mourn. Dying work is hard work. Dying pangs often are sore pangs. It is the folly of man to defer repentance to the deathbed, and to have that to do, which is one thing needful when unfit to do anything. I thought that was a beautiful analysis of this. I mean, Job talks about the flesh is always dying, and we mustn't leave to the very end as we reach this point of transition to get ourselves right with God. He has prepared himself for death. My transgressions are sealed up in a bag. You cover my iniquity. I have offered the sacrifices. I've repented in my heart. I have asked for forgiveness. I have done the work that needed to be done for repentance in order that I may do the hard work of dying. He says that he has longed to be in the world where God's wrath will be past him, because he is continually burdened and oppressed. I feel like a child who is constantly being scolded and disciplined. He is anxious for those days to be over. My sins have caused extreme measures, and I have not done enough to merit such interference, he says. And I realize that life is not fair. Life is not fair, but it is beyond comprehension, far more than he felt he could bear. He complains of the overall condition of mankind in general, that we see the decays of earth before us, ever before us. Nothing will last. The mountains don't last. The stones won't last. The leaves, etc. Everything on earth is worse for the wearing. We all get this. Now, we were just talking about Leah's building a brand new house. And I remember moving into this house, and it was brand new. And it was not long before I was cleaning the cobwebs, and I was scrubbing the grout in the shower because of the mold. And there's an ever persistent decay in life in general. Not only are our bodies failing, but we plant our gardens again and again, only for them to die and come forth again. And so we're ever seeing decay before us. And we know that. And we all get this. Nobody's surprised when men's bodies decay on earth. He will make a point that he is no different than any other person in mankind. You will show in death the destruction of all men who hope in the worldly confidences and comforts. Everybody's going to be changed. Everybody's going to be sent up. They will be brought low. Everybody's going to be brought low. And at the end, by seeing the dying man, God prevails against man and he dies. His countenance changes. His body is subject to sickness. Or just a few minutes after death comes the change, or longer maybe than the change. We don't know how it will work. But the lovely countenance will grow pale and ghastly. The body no longer houses the soul which gave that lovely impression. You know, my parents both lay in the casket. Russ's parents both lay in the caskets, but the countenance of the face was gone, because the soul is what gives the countenance of the face. The body is no longer useful. It no longer houses the soul. It's the body of one who has gone on ahead, or of before, into the grave, or to be with God. For the body that no longer houses the whole, it doesn't express anything any longer. And so the joyful become sad, the arrogant become humble, the proud become empty, the most bold give up control, and even they will change. And at times the dying will not realize their final days of life, perhaps even as they lay in the bed. But it's hard work to die, and dying pangs can be sore sometimes. And it's a time that brings men to repent, though I pity the ones who wait so long, because You may get to a point, as Job says, you can wait so long that you can't even do that as you die, that you're not even able to do that. It's hard to understand. And then we die and we don't even know that those mourn us. We're not present at the funeral. The sons come to honor, and we don't really know that. We may be aware and cognizant of the fact that our children will mourn us. But Job indicates here, what we must realize, and that is that after the grave, it is too far gone. It is too late to do the things we need to do in order to be who we need to be when we die, so that the change takes us to God and not punishment. And there are so many in our world who are afraid of death. In fact, if you ask men in a survey, I'm pretty sure, I know I looked this up several years ago, the number one fear of man is death. But a Christian doesn't live with that fear of death. Now, it may be scary to think, how am I going to die? But we don't fear death, because in death is the victory. Death to those who have hope, have hope, is the victory. But death to those who have no hope, it's a tragedy. And that is what is being expressed here. To leave the earth to eternal punishment is tragedy. To leave the earth to be with God is victory. Job knew that living was affliction for him, and to die was gain. And so we just have to think about what it is that we know about death, and remember what it is that we remember about death, and it will change the way we live our lives. All right, so now we're going to go into the second round of conversation. Again, Eliphaz, who I believe probably is the eldest, will speak. He's the Temanite. He answered and said, and we've talked about the fact that we don't know how these conversations really went. I think that they spent months with Job, probably, if not years, having conversations with Job. Perhaps they left and came again, we're not told. But these are men who were themselves righteous in the sense of religion. And so Eliphaz will begin with more conversation. I do believe the conversation gets more rank, it gets harder, it gets more unwise, there's less discernment as time goes on and as more is said. So Eliphaz begins by saying, should a wise man answer with empty knowledge and fill himself with the east wind? Should he reason with unprofitable talk, or by speeches with which he can do no good? Yes, you cast off fear and restrain prayer before God, for your iniquity teaches your mouth, and you choose the tongue of crafty. Your own mouth condemns you, and not I. Yes, your own lips testify against you. Are you the first man born the first man who was born? Or were you made before the hills? Have you heard the counsel of God? Do you limit wisdom to yourself? What do you know that we do not know? What do you understand that is not in us? Both the gray-haired and the aged are among us, much older than your father. And the consolations of God are the consolations of God too small for you, and the words spoken gently with you? Why does your heart carry you away? And what do your eyes wink at, that you turn your spirit against God and let such words go out of your mouth? What is man that he should be pure, and he who is born of woman that he should be righteous? If God puts no trust in his saints, and the heavens are not pure in his sight, how much less a man who is abominable and filthy, who drinks iniquity like water? I just want to stop for just a minute here and talk a little bit about how we speak to one another, and how we begin to be those who sit in judgment of others. And it is an interesting conversation. Really, what we see in round 2, particularly in the book of Job, in these conversations with these men, is that they really begin to really lack grace at all. There's no mercy. There's no grace for Job. They're not going to give him an inch. They're going to kick him when he's down. There's just no grace. And it is an interesting thing to think about. How will we provide that for others? You know, the key to forgiveness is love, grace, mercy. And so, how do we approach others' sins or even their circumstances that we might not understand, that we might think, well, I would deal with it this way or that way? You know, it's easy to sum up the shortcomings or the misfortunes of others as, well, you know, they probably deserve that because this is what they did. And do we allow ourselves in times like these friends were put into, because it was horrible for them as well, but do we allow ourselves, our hearts, to be enlarged and to fill our hearts with wisdom and understanding, or do we excuse ourselves? You know, I think it's easy to excuse ourselves from that opportunity to learn and to grow because someone might deserve what they get. And there may be reasons why they thought Job might deserve some of this, but that is certainly not what God has done for us, is it? And so I think that it's just interesting for me to think about, because can you imagine if God provided grace the way that we do sometimes? You know, one of the worst things that Job had to endure was these graceless words of his friends, who came to comfort him. Grace is something we talk about a lot when it comes to God. We are thrilled with grace, with the grace that God provides us so well. But we don't often think of ourselves as the givers of grace, but we should be. So Eliphaz begins this second attack on Job, and he comes out really with his fistball. He's just gonna really sock it to Job. And instead of being softened by the complaints of Job, I mean, Job has expressed the fact that, you know, he knows as much as these men know, that he doesn't know why this is happening to him, and that he would much rather be in the grave than on earth. It doesn't seem to soften any of these men's arguments towards him. And we've talked about this too. I think they've become a little bit of these right fighters. They want to be right. And every time Job speaks, he seems to disqualify them from being right. He seems to question the fact that they might always be right. I think they're probably accustomed to being right. They make a lot of good observations, just if you look at the world. And so they haven't softened. They've become more hard and more calloused. I think they're more comfortable now looking at Job. You know, they're not as appalled by just all of the things that have happened to him. It's easy to forget. Eliphaz will unjustly charge Job with casting off the fear of God, that he no longer fears God in all regard of him, and that he no longer prays. I mean, he has no idea of that. He's just making these assumptions that Job has left God because it seems as if God is disciplining and sending these afflictions. He charges Job with self-conceit, with being arrogant. He charges him with contempt of the counsel and the comforts that his friends have given. He says, you don't even appreciate us coming and all these wise words that we're giving you, all of the warnings, you know, if you just had prayed and turned back. And we're apt to think that what we say is so important, you know, when others with reason might think little of it. You know, when we offer our suggestions, when we offer our advice, when we give others our judgment and reasoning, and they think very little of us, it is upsetting to us. We tend to take offense at that. He charges him with, rather than opposing what they've said, opposing God. And he really does speak such unconstructive and harsh words to Job. By the time this is all finished, of course, the friends have really done themselves in. Job, they will have to seek Job's forgiveness, who he readily gives his forgiveness for, and offer sacrifices for them. And so, can you imagine the patience that God has with us? All the things we get wrong, all of the things we don't know that we make assumptions for. all of the talking that we do, all of the advice that we can give that might be. And God is so patient and graceful with us. No one's ready to be silent yet of these men. They had not said enough. You know, sometimes we just need to know when to be quiet. They would have fared better had some of them just stopped. And the more Job is unwilling to praise his friends for all of the wisdom that they have given, they become harsher and harsher. And Eliphaz, in this second round, accuses Job of folly and silliness and even being absurd, that the idea of his previous reputation is gone, that, you know, it doesn't matter what you were before, Job. It does not matter. Everybody's forgotten that. That is a lifelong past. You are no longer what you used to be. We can see that God has dealt with you, and you no longer are who you used to be. Nobody respects you anymore. What you were is no more. And in fact, all three of his friends will say that in this conversation. You're just a nothing in comparison to what people used to think that you were. They remind Job of all of the false wisdom in the world, that it is unprofitable and evil to talk about the things that we don't know about. Such an interesting thing, because of course that is what they're doing, and they have no idea that they're doing it. That conversation they say conversation that should have been monitored and checked. They had conversations should have been monitored and checked, but it was not. It gets out of hand. Eliphaz charges Job with dismissing God, with that he has forgotten God, that he's forgotten how to fear God, is what the text actually said. He says, thou casteth off fear, that the religion of a righteous man that should consist of fear and prayer has been eliminated from Job's life, is what he says here. You know, Solomon's entire summary of every purpose of life, the purpose of life, his entire summary, after exploring every wisdom of the world, every form of entertainment, every source of riches, every event of pleasure, was to fear God and be obedient to him, in the last chapter of Ecclesiastes. And so we know that that is the purpose of life. And fear is at the very beginning of obedience. It is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It is the beginning of wisdom. And we must not lose sight of this. And Job had not. He knew that he didn't know. Sometimes knowing is knowing that we don't know. In fact, much of the time, knowing is knowing that we don't know. And I think that that's an important thing, because that is not something that you hear men say. That sometimes we just live by extreme faith, knowing that we don't know why things happen the way that they do. He then, in the same expression, accuses Job of then assuming that God is his equal, or to be empty in his outward actions, that he's a hypocrite. Again, we get back to him being a hypocrite. Your mouth utters your sin. Thou teachest others to have the same thoughts as you, thoughts of God and religion that you have yourself. You have cast off fear and prayer, and you speak sinfully, and you draw others away. You speak of your sin, and it shows that your religion is false and empty. You mix your good words with your bad words, therefore you lead others astray. These are some quotes from Charles Swindoll in his book on Job. What knowest thou that we know not, is what they're saying. How natural are such replies as these in the heat of argument, but how simple do they look afterwards upon review. What do you know that we don't know? I mean, this is just such empty talk. And so, as opposing the stream of iniquity, a venerable name under the shade of which all contending parties strive to shelter themselves, with us are the gray-headed and the very aged men. So they're saying, listen, we've got all the age on our side. You don't know anything. In fact, you weren't even born at the time that the men that agree with us were born. We have the fathers on our side. All the ancient doctors of the church are of our opinion. A thing soon said, but not so well proved, not so soon proved. And when proved, truth is not so soon discovered and proved by it as much as most people imagine. In other words, we don't prove ourselves by what our grandfather said. If our grandfather spoke truth and righteousness based off of the word of God, then it is truth and righteousness based off the word of God. And we can be greatly influenced by people who know righteousness. But you can't prove something based off of what a former generation has said. But that's what they're doing. That's what Eliphaz is saying, that even the ancients said the things that we say, as if that was proof. He accuses Job of being carried away so far as to leave his own true religion, that he now winks at the things that before he would have objected to. You turn your spirit against God, that Job was tired of God and his spirit had given up on God. And finally, in these verses, Job is accused by Eliphaz of justifying to such a degree as to make himself sinless, which is outrageous because Job has talked constantly about his sins and about his God forgiving. And were it not for God's forgiveness, no man could stand before God. And so, weren't you born just like us and sin just like any other human? A lot of people will tell you that this is talking about, born depravity and the Calvinist view of, that we're born with iniquity and sin. But I don't know that is actually a doctrine they had, but certainly we know that is not true. But what they're saying is you're just a human like the rest of us. You are not sinless. All men sin. And even at this point, they knew that. You're a hypocrite is what you are, they say. That you say you're sinless and you are not. That you are born to a woman just like we are. And so the assumptions of Job's protest and the conclusions of the reasons for the afflictions remain in the shadow of truth, veiled from the eyes of these men who have come to comfort and well beyond their depth of understanding. And so we must remember this before we speak and before we offer. We must, if there are unknowns, if there are unknowns in the circumstances, if there are things that we don't know about the situation or about what's happened, or if we simply don't know that God has an answer, sometimes we need to just sit silently. I don't know why God takes away people and we lose people. I don't know why there are injustices for children in life. I don't understand it. And the scriptures don't always take us there. But the worst thing for us to do is to make assumptions about another concerning those things. And so those are the things I think we must learn as we read the book of Job. Aside from Job's extreme patience, it is those things that we must see. And so if we go on with this text, Eliphaz says, I will tell you, hear me. I'm going to speak and you're going to be quiet. Can you imagine the audacity at this point? What I have seen, I will declare what wise men have told, not hiding anything received from their fathers, to whom alone the land was given, and no alien passed among them. The wicked man writhes with pain all of his days, and the number of years is hidden from the oppressor. Dreadful sounds are in his ears. In prosperity, the destroyer comes upon him. He does not believe that he will return from darkness, for a sword is waiting for him. He wanders about for bread, saying, where is it? He knows that the day of darkness is ready at his hand. Trouble and anguish make him afraid. They overpower him like a king ready for battle. For he stretches out his hand against God and acts defiantly against the Almighty, running stubbornly against him with his strong embossed shield. Though he has covered his face with his fatness and made his waist heavy with fat. He dwells in desolate cities, in houses which no one inhabits, which are destined to become ruins. He will not be rich, nor will his wealth continue, nor will his possessions overspread the earth. He will not depart from darkness. The flame will dry out his branches, and by the breath of his mouth he will go away. Let him not trust in futile things, deceiving himself, for futility will be his reward. It will be accomplished before his time, and his branch will not be green. He will shake off his unripe vein like his unripe grape like a vine, cast off his bosom like an olive tree. For the company of hypocrites will be barren, and the fire will consume the tents of bribery. They conceive trouble and bring forth futility. Their womb prepares deceits. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine? And the thing about it is, Job is just simply being tested. There is no true reason in that these men have experienced that has caused any of this. And these words are just harsh and horrible. This is a quote by Matthew Henry. Eliphaz, having reproved Job for his answers, here comes to maintain his own thesis. He's going to give his thesis of life and how life happens and why all this calamity has come upon this man, upon which he built his censor of Job. It's all now about Job. It's not about the unknown. It's just about Job. His opinion is that those who are wicked are certainly miserable. Stop. That's it, period. Whence he would infer that those who are miserable are certainly wicked. If you've got one, you've got the other. If those who are wicked are certainly miserable, then those who are miserable are certainly wicked. And therefore, Job is so. That's what this whole text is saying. He begins as one who would teach instead of learn. I will tell you and you will hear me. What I've seen, I will declare. What wise men have told me. Not hiding anything. I'm not going to hide anything. I'm just going to lay it all out there for you, Job. Tell you how it is. As men so often do, when we condemn another's thoughts, we then hold up our own thoughts as prophet. Job no longer had any thoughts that were worthy because he was the one in the situation, because he was the one that had seemingly lost the battle of life. And so everybody else gets to make the rules. Everybody else, gets to talk. Everybody else gets to be wise because there's nothing left of him. He did not say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. I don't understand what's happening. I'm sorry. He didn't say, I'm not sure. But instead, I will talk and you will listen. I don't know how this could be. He didn't say that. And again, he states his resume and his credentials, doesn't he? He's going to start with why he should be allowed to talk. I will teach you from my own experiences and from my observations. I will teach you from what I know of those who have lived before us. Wisdoms of the ancient, the wise men of old. Not always bad assumptions. Lessons learned and taught by parents, grandparents, traditional wisdoms, that's fine. But he knew nothing of the situation. The ancients knew nothing of the situation. He again notes that good and wise people ordinarily prosper. I'll tell you what, Job, I just haven't seen this with good people before. This is just not what happens to good people. That it is the unwise and the evil who are not blessed. They're the ones who are tormented and defeated. I mean, they run themselves ragged, and then finally their tents are useless, and they got old broken bodies, and you got a bunch of people that have bad health because they've had bad habits and they've done evil things, and can you imagine Eliphaz standing and looking at this dear man and telling him in all of his afflictions that he's gotten what he deserved? That's what he's saying. All I know is you've gotten what you deserve. You need to sit there and listen to me because you deserve all of this. I mean, that's what he says. You know whose tents are blown away? You know whose loses their loved ones? You know whose lives are cut short? You know who are afflicted? Do you know who chase life and never get it? Do you know who chase honor and never get it? It's not the good people, he says. And so this wounded and damaged and Sad man. Eliphaz says, got what he deserved. Eliphaz uses language and tone of one that has no grace for his friend. Have you ever known somebody who just rubs salt in the wounds? They know what gets after somebody and they just rub salt in the wound or kick somebody when they're down, pulls the drowning man under. That's exactly what we're watching here. Just confuse somebody. I don't even know what this means really, but I hear this all the time now, gaslighting. I guess that means you confuse somebody in an argument, or maybe I had it wrong. I don't really know. That's a new term. It's a, but they know what to say in an argument. I mean, let's just hit Job when he's down, tell him it's all his fault. Eliphaz seemed to have forgotten that Job had lost all of his children, everything he owned, his ability to live without pain. He had nothing left. And let's just bring this out in the open. I mean, if nothing else, just have mercy on this man. Even if he were their enemy. Please allow us to learn what God's grace is about and what we demonstrate in our own lives. Goodness gracious. He basically says, I'll tell you what. This is what happens when bad men do bad things. When religious men are hypocrites and they're really empty. This is what God does for them. And he goes on to say, and then Bildad goes on to say, we're going to look at what Bildad says in round 2. And so now we have Bildad who is speaking. Then Bildad, the Shuhite, answered and said, how long till you put an end to the words? Gain understanding, and afterwards we will speak. So now Eliphaz is hitting, he's got him when he's down, he's told him this is all happening because this is what happens to wicked people. Now Bildad's going to say his say. Gain understanding, and afterward we will speak. We really should, you're far past, I mean, we shouldn't even be talking to you. There's no use for you anymore. Why are we counted as beasts and regarded as stupid in your sight? You who tear yourself in anger, shall the earth be forsaken for you? Or shall the rock be removed from its place? The light of the wicked indeed goes out, and the flame of his fire does not shine. The light is dark in his tent, and his lamp beside him is put out. The steps of his strength are shortened, and his own counsel cast him down. For he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walks into a snare. The net takes him by the heel, and a snare lays hold of him. A noose is hidden for him in the ground, and a trap for him in the road. So now Bildad will speak. And in this chapter, Bildad makes his second assault. So next time, we're going to look at Job's answer to all 3 of these. Their language is becoming more familiar to us. They repeat a lot of what is said, and I think this is an easier way for us to look at these conversations. But Bildad makes this second assault in this discourse. He had given him encouragement in earlier that to hope that all would be well finally, that if he would repent, that God would finally make things better. But here there is not a word of that. He no longer talks about a hope. He no longer talks about what Job can do to turn things around. He's grown more peevish, and he is so far from being convinced of Job's reasoning that he is more exasperated. Look at the way he begins. He sharply reproves Job as being haughty and passionate, obstinate in his opinion. He enlarges his doctrine that he had before maintained. He talks about the wicked people and the misers and how they get what they deserve. And so he continues, this, says Bildad, is the condition of the wicked man, and therefore thou art one. He says, let me tell you who finds themselves in the state that you're in, wicked people, and therefore you must be wicked. Same conclusion. He starts as he had before. He says, let me say this again. Is God going to hold his breath while you are getting your life together and getting it all straightened out? He says, I've told you, listen, God's not going to hold on forever. He's not going to wait forever for you to get yourself straightened out and figured out and repent and get back to him and make this thing right. And so that's how Bildad starts. Very sarcastic, very mean language. He is so insulting that he begins his discourse, not to mention he says the same things over and over. like a terrible broken record. He's no longer interested in Job's pains, in his losses, only in his being right, and Job finally admitting that he and the others are right. That's what he starts with. He starts by saying, we almost don't have time for this. Gain understanding, and afterward we can actually have a rational conversation. Admit that we're right, and finally we can talk some sense into you. It's just remarkable what Job had to endure with these friends. And so that's where he starts. It's just awful. It's so easy for us to fall into the same thing, that we just want somebody to tell us we're right. And we may not understand the circumstances. Bildad is so clear. He's so clear in his thinking. He is so sure that he's right. God is just and he's fair, he says. He's just and he's fair, and he punishes the wicked and he blesses the righteous. It's black and white. If you repent, God will bless you, and if you don't, he won't. Bildad's theology has no room for mystery. There is no room for God. No room for God's ways to be his own ways. It's all got to be Bildad's ways. It's got to be the way that he understands. Bildad believes that God is in control, but he does not allow God to test or to stretch so that he can heal and mend. Bildad just doesn't understand that about God. He's not there. He does not have that understanding. And so at times, God does not remove our test for some time, if he ever does. Paul tells us, Paul 3 times has gone to God and asked God to remove this thorn of the flesh for him. Paul thinks he could be much more useful if God were to just listen and remove whatever weakness it was. Separate times he had prayed to God to remove it. He knew God was in control. And listen to God's answer. My grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. But Bildad had no space for that. And so Job was not allowed to have that ability with these conversations. Job will learn the same. Paul answers for us to learn maturity. He wants us to know that it is in affliction that we learn, that it is the power of learning patience through affliction. Bildad just didn't have room for it. There was no room for grace. There was no room for compassion. There was no room for mercy. There was no room for growth. And then he just reminds him again and again that finally wicked men, they are miserable on earth, and then they just die. And nobody remembers it, and nothing comes of it. Bildad just has no use for him at this point. And he reminds him, if you don't get yourself together, God's not going to wait forever, because people die. Your time is going to come to an end, and you're going to be gone. As if Job has not already expressed that. He says you're like a light that's going out. The best and the brightest part of man is put out. Hope, joy, wealth, health, honor, power. Everything will go away. This is an allegory, picture of the presentation of death is what these are. These are just word pictures for us. All is like a candle, just wasting away, burning down, easily blown out. The wicked indeed goes out, the flame of his fire does not shine. Verse 6, the light is dark in his tent, his lamp is beside him, is put out. Or he says, you're like a person who's trapped, who's heading for death. The implication is that Job has a scheme that he's not willing to admit, and that he's not just confessing the real truth. He talks to him about, for he's cast into his own net by his own feet. He says, it's your own fault. Somehow you're hypocritical, or you've done something evil, and you're caught in your own snare. You've set your own trap for yourself, and something you've done has set you in this trap. And now you're caught in the snare. And the net takes him up by the heel. The snare lays hold of him. A bird or an animal that's caught in the snare or the cage, or someone's taken into custody in order that they might be punished. Satan's cast a net or a snare or a trap to tempt, and that his own actions had led him into this trap, and now he's heading for death because of his own self and his own actions. It's unbelievable, Bildad's insinuation here. Job, this is what happens to evil people who are caught up in a trap. They just run into their own destruction. Good grief. What a sad time for Job. Bildad says, of course you're about to meet the end. You have fallen prey into the evil that you've done. God allows you to be trapped as you are because that's what happens to those who run without caution. Terrors frighten him on every side, verse 11. Drive him to his feet. This is talking about evil people. Bildad is already said, this is you, Job. His strength is starved and destruction is ready at his side. It devours patches of his skin. The firstborn of death devours his limbs. He is uprooted from the shelter of his tent. They parade him before the king of terrors. They dwell in his tents who are none of his. Brimstone is scattered on his dwelling. His roots are dried out below. His branch withered is above. The memory of him perishes from the earth. He has no name among the renowned. He is driven from light into darkness, chased out of the word. He has neither son nor prosperity among his people, nor any remaining in his dwellings. Those in the west are astonished at his day, as those in the east are frightened. Surely such are the dwellings of the wicked, and this is the place of him who does not know God. You are where you are because you, Bildad, have lived in a way that has brought upon you destruction. Destruction that wicked people deserve. And that is reserved for you, not just here, but in the other world, as the world seizes you. Come and see what a miserable condition the sinner is on the day that he falls. Terrors frighten him on every side, driving from his feet. His strength is starved. Destruction is ready at his side. He's uprooted. Bildad assures Job that he is disheartened and weakened by continued terrors that come upon him from a sense of his own guilt and dread of God's wrath. The terrors of his own conscience haunt him so that he will never be at ease. So hard for Job to hear. The assumptions being that Job does not have ease because he is evil. And not only that, but if he tries to get away, the terrors follow him. The earth is sick of him. Hell is trying to grab him. He can't go and he won't get away. He can't and he won't get away. He is unable and not capable of getting away, and the brimstone and fire rains upon his body and he is undone. How unfair is Bildad in his assessment of Job? How miserable a wicked man's death is, he says. Can you imagine these words to Job? Like swords in the heart. Death devours you, Job. It takes your strength and your flesh, his shelter, his confidence, all that he had trusted in. Bildad tells him, everything's gone. Everything you trusted in. Everything's been taken away. You have nothing to rely on, not even your own tabernacle. His own soul was his confidence. But that will be rooted out. And even your soul will be rooted out of its body as a tree that fell to the ground. Your soul will be required of you. The king of terrors then, death. It's just amazing. His roots will be dried from below. His branch withers above. He has neither son nor prosperity among his people, nor any remaining in his dwellings. Those in the west are astonished by his day, as those in the east are frightened. So as if Job needs reminders of all that he has lost, Bildad now will tell him that his family is sunk and that it has been cut off, and the wrath and the curse of God lie upon his head and his heart and also in his house. And that God either has already consumed or will consume. His children have perished or will perish. His have perished, the evils perish, either with him or after him, for all of the evil that he has done. The evil are uprooted and cut off, remembered no more. His memory is buried with him, and all of the honor is laid and lost in the dust, stained with infamy. Bildad ends his comments with the ultimate insult. You do not even know God. It is as if he fires both barrels at point blank range. Here sits Job, itching terribly, fever, no doubt his head shaved without honor, enduring pain and losses. This man, this friend, dresses him down and concludes that he does not even know God. I wonder why our Lord and our God ensured that we knew this conversation. He did. He gave it to it for us. It's so terribly painful. Why include this scene in his word? Surely it's a warning to all who ever live. The same conversation can surface up in us in the harsh form of judgmental ones who find it hard to offer an encouraging word or a kind word for affliction. Or perhaps somebody who criticizes everyone and everything, having never experienced anything that anybody else has done, criticizing what they have done when they've been through something that they have never experienced themselves, never thinking about grace or compassion. Or it can be displayed by a teacher who communicates in a harsh and uncompassionate way. It can show an impatience, or in short and curt comments, in unkindness, ugliness of our own speech. And finally, before we leave Bildad, and I'll leave it at that tonight, let us remember he's talking to the wrong person. And he's speaking with the wrong motive. He's forgotten why he came. Bildad has spoken about death, about being haunted by the king of terrors, and being driven to this dreadful state of mind, all of which is true if a person does not know the Lord. But unfortunately, that was not Job. It wasn't Job. And so his words were what he accused Job of, empty and like wind. He had absolutely no right to say the things that he had said. He had the wrong motive, and therefore he spoke the wrong words to the wrong man. Okay, let me stop the recording.